Hello and welcome to the second of the videos about dynamic capabilities. Now remember, we're looking at this view of where competitive advantage comes from that suggests that sustainable advantage comes from creating a series of temporary advantages. So yes, it's still based on having resources, but you have to keep refreshing and moving on to sustain competitive advantage as others catch up with you. Now you remember that dynamic capabilities are those consistent routines that allow the firm to integrate, build and reconfigure its competencies and resources, and therefore address rapidly changing environments. So effectively it's able to apply competencies more astutely and more rapidly than others, and therefore gains advantage and moves on before others have mimicked what it's doing. We said, according to Thies and Pisano, there were three types of dynamic capabilities, three types of routines. There were learning or sensing routines through which an organisation recognised the opportunities and ways to develop its competencies. There were managing or seizing routines that allowed the organisation to deploy its competencies and resources and so grasp those opportunities. And then there were transforming or reconfiguring routines that allowed the organisation to change its competency portfolio, bring in new competencies and let go of old competencies and resources that were no longer valuable to the firm. And we talked about some of the different routines that could exist under each of these types. So under learning, whole process of experimentation and absorption of new knowledge, that learning process as knowledge was discovered by individuals, shared at a work group level and then institutionalized into the structures and processes of the organization. And examples might be around HRM processes, working with partnerships, market scanning, and for sharing knowledge across the organisation, forums and networks. We talked about for managing routines, seizing routines, around how coordination took place of resources across the firm, how that sharing and deploying of competencies and resources to where they can be of most effective use was built into the values and behaviours in the organisation. So we're seeing routines like strategic planning, incentive systems and allocation committees, much like how capital is allocated, but key resources and competencies being allocated across the firm. And then in terms of reconfiguring and transforming routines, we're talking about how acquisitions and alliances can be used to bring new competencies and resources into the firm, and how cultural and organisational change to be used to release competencies that in some cases an organisation might be reluctant to let go of. Now in this video I want to talk about two examples to give you a sense of what dynamic capabilities really look like. And so I want to talk about IBM and also about Samsung. But let's start with IBM first. Now going back into the early 1990s, IBM was in danger of failing. It had posted its biggest loss in its history, so like $8 billion in 1993, and many were talking about it being broken up. The company seemed to be failing. Now it's against this backdrop that the new chief executive, Lou Gerstner, took over the firm, and under him and his successor, Sam Palmisano, IBM went from that seeming failure to success. Now, as well as stabilising the company in the mid-1990s, Gerstner set IBM on a path to transform itself, moving from a traditional hardware manufacturer to a company that provides technology solutions. So integrating systems from various suppliers to solve problems rather than using its own manufactured systems. This meant that IBM would need to adjust the competencies it did have in specific technologies such as mainframe computer know-how, microprocessor and IT infrastructure, and also learn new competencies in the selling and delivering of customer solutions and integrating technology from a wide range of suppliers. Now, those new competencies were not unique, and success therefore would mean ongoing enhancement and change of competencies. Now, IBM drove that in the 1990s and 2000s with a radical shift in its approach to generating strategic insight and driving strategic execution, within which it created a range of sensing and seizing dynamic capabilities. Now remember, dynamic capabilities are specific routines and processes that constantly act on the competency and resource portfolio of the firm. So let's look at the specific routines IBM put in place according to its Senior Vice President for Strategy at the time, Bruce Harreld. Well, starting with sensing routines. Well, Harreld talks about a significant shift in the function of IBM's strategy team. As in many traditional firms, this team's focus had been on the annual strategic planning process. But to Gershner, that process and the document that was produced was worthless chartware, he called it. Instead, the strategy function was realigned to work in partnership with IBM's general managers at the business unit level in the generation of strategic insight and systematically identifying and grasping business opportunities. An internal strategic consulting group is a good way to describe what they were moving to. With a dramatic change in skill base, the function was now instrumental in facilitating the generation of new knowledge and insight, and also its dissemination across the organisation. It was also used to broaden the experience of successful general managers, with many joining the team for an 18 to 30 month period before moving on to other business roles. IBM also put in place a range of cross-organisational forums and senior teams. A technology team made up of experts across the organisation would meet monthly to discuss the market readiness and potential of new technologies. Also set up was the integration and values team. This was made up of a group of 300 key leaders selected annually by the IBM executive. That team and the strategy team would then meet monthly to consider market developments, business unit results, and explore new growth opportunities. As a result of those meetings, outcomes might vary from new market entry decisions, adjustment of business plans, and even the complete exit from a business. Another routine they used was structured deep dives. This was a process that was used to confront performance or opportunity gaps, perhaps a new technology or changing competition. These are staffed by the strategy function and the relevant operating unit, and provides highly analytical and fact-based scrutiny of any issue. Then across the firm, we also see IBM using a wide range of staff transfers and cross-functional teamwork to explore new areas. Now, turning to seizing dynamic capabilities, well, the integration and values team that I already mentioned also plays a key role here as well. This team was responsible for developing company-wide initiatives, so-called winning ways, that required considerable cross-business unit integration. They would assign leaders and then monitor the results of such initiatives. IBM also put in place an integrated set of processes, incentives and structures designed to seize emerging business opportunities, EBOs as they called them. Where an emerging business opportunity was identified, each effective a new value proposition, a separate unit is created with its own leadership, reporting lines and funding. So protect the EBOs as a nascent new business. But each EBO is reviewed robustly and monthly against milestones, a process many describe as like having root canal work, it was so painful. But where those EBOs were successful, they were then folded back into the main business. If not, they were quickly stopped, the resources redeployed, and other new EBOs would take their place. Another seizing routine were strategic leadership forums. Now these are 3.5-day workshops built around a specific opportunity or performance gap. And they bring together the relevant and responsible people to work intensely on a particular issue. Now, these meetings were very focused, direct, and can be emotional debates with the expectation that people will argue and fight, but it was expected that they would leave with an agreement. IBM also uses mini SLFs to look at smaller issues throughout the firm. Then, to provide funding for the emerging business opportunities, IBM created a corporation investment fund. This is a circa $500 million internal venturing fund where the money is taken from existing business units and used specifically to provide resources to the new initiatives. Funding decisions are made every quarter with a robust process in place to starve failing initiatives and to significantly invest where there is promise. As you can see from these sensing and seizing routines, they are not unique. What appears different about IBM, at least at the time, was the wide range and systematic approach that the firm was adopting. The transforming routines in IBM are less well evidenced and documented, although undoubtedly the EBOs were creating new strategic resources and competencies. It is clear though that IBM was using partnerships and acquisitions to bring in new resources and competencies needed in transiting from being a traditional mainframe manufacturer to being a solutions provider. So, overall, it's clear IBM did put in place an extensive range of dynamic capabilities, and that does appear to have been a driver in its subsequent success. Although more evidence is probably needed regarding its transformation routines before judging whether or not it could make another turnaround without facing a life-threatening burning platform. Okay, turning to Samsung, another example of dynamic capabilities. Now, Samsung was surprised in 2007 when Apple launched the iPhone. At that stage, the firm was not a major player in the smartphone industry. But in 3 years, it had launched its first smartphone, the Galaxy, and by 2013 had become the global leader in smartphones, having 32% of global market share compared to Apple's 15%. That is despite Apple's early lead and clear competencies, its iOS platform and its software and design competencies. Now, like many traditional integrated groups, Keiretsu's in Japan, Cables in Korea, historically Samsung had thrived through realizing synergies across the group's subsidiaries, its affiliates and its divisions, and a high level of internal cooperation. However, such close relationships and obligation can prompt decline in effectiveness, and a downward spiral of competitiveness can set in. In Samsung, such concerns proved justified with the arrival of the 1997 Asian financial crisis. The firm faced massive losses and impending failures. So again, like IBM, was facing a burning platform. Now, the chairman of the company at the time believed Samsung could not become a global leader carrying mediocre affiliates, maintaining that quiet life equilibrium of a traditional cable. Here's Samsung's organisational chart at the time. So the corporate headquarters, or strategy office was it called, reporting through the chairman, and then the affiliate companies reporting through to that headquarters. Only 4 major affiliates are shown here. There were 75 affiliates in total that made up the Samsung cable. And then Samsung Electronics, like the other affiliates, would have a number of focused divisions. So, in order to address the issue the chairman was concerned about, Samsung moved to increase internal competition among its affiliates, divisions, and even among its employees. The result was a unique design for internal co-opetition. It included routines around dual sourcing and parallel development. Now, there is of course a danger with increasing internal competition. It has the potential to generate hostility between business units, devastate team spirit, and destroy cross-organisational cooperation and synergy. Hence, Samsung evolved a set of dynamic capabilities to ensure a balance was maintained between cooperation and competition, so that continuous improvement in performance could be gained without losing the benefits of cooperation across the cable. So, starting again with sensing dynamic capabilities. Samsung established a range of routines to sense new technology developments. These routines included establishing an R&D centre in Silicon Valley to tap into developments there, and close cooperation with key suppliers and other partners and research centres. And it wasn't just technology. Unusually for such a company, was also doing formal market research on fashion developments. Linked to that, it took steps to ensure that the knowledge gained was then disseminated across Samsung through scheduled technology forums and conferences. Also linked to sensing, it also developed a range of HRM practices that ensured managers are transferred in and out of the corporate headquarters and also between affiliates and divisions. So knowledge and best practice is shared across Samsung. In the seizing dynamic capabilities, we particularly see the promotion of internal competition. In particular, Samsung put in place a dual sourcing process. In this, affiliates are required to purchase components both internally and externally. They look to have 3 or 4 vendors, including an internal vendor if possible. In this, selection is based entirely on commercial criteria: quality, price, delivery. Indeed, many internal units claim they are more harshly treated, citing Samsung's bailing out of failing external suppliers like the Japanese electronics manufacturer Sharp to drive up competition. Increasingly, the internal pressure pushed business units to improve their performance and through that often seek to co-develop new products with an internal partner to be the preferred supplier. Internal competition is also found in the allocation of central headquarters resources, and also in unit and individual performance assessment and promotion policies. Individuals are assessed against peers on relative performance, with poor performance leading to an exit. For business units, it means the continual readjustment of organisational arrangements and the reallocation of valuable resources to higher potential areas. However, the dangers of too much internal competition are countered by further routines. Samsung uses multi-divisional and cross-affiliate development teams and expert secondments to accelerate major product developments, as it did in launching its Galaxy smartphone in response to Apple. The headquarters actively intervenes to facilitate resolution where competitive tensions become problematic. And incentive schemes, promotion decisions, and informal networks between senior managers promote a focus on performance of the whole company and not just their current business unit. Finally, looking at transformation dynamic capabilities, we see a signature routine in Samsung, that of parallel development. Despite the cost of duplication, the firm will set going multiple development initiatives targeting the same technology in a number of divisions, affiliates, or teams. Each development project competes to be selected to become adopted as the standard. This approach speeds development and increases the diversity of knowledge. But also that survival of the fittest approach also spurs a motivation to break with past practices and mindsets. However, Samsung is careful to ensure developed expertise and resources are not wasted. Once an approach is chosen, the firm integrates all the people involved into a pool to develop its knowledge base. Constant restructuring across Samsung also ensures redundant approaches, resources, and businesses are jettisoned. The shift in Samsung's culture to competition also plays a role here. And also, like IBM, Samsung uses acquisitions, alliances, and licensing agreements to systematically bring in new resources and competencies. So, again, a wide set of specific, deliberate routines ensuring Samsung senses new opportunities to adjust and develops its portfolio of competencies and resources to grasp those opportunities. It would appear that while Apple took an early lead through Vryro competencies it possesses, Samsung has overtaken it to become a global leader through its use of dynamic capabilities. It will be interesting to see how Samsung's dynamic capabilities allow it to respond to the more recent issues it has faced. So with IBM and Samsung, we have two examples of organisations that seem to thrive through deploying dynamic capabilities rather than through the possession of competencies and resources that pass all elements of the Vryro test. When developing strategy using dynamic capabilities, or when analysing a firm, you need to look for specific, deliberate and consistent routines or processes operating in the organisation, as we saw in Samsung and IBM. What you can't do is just infer the presence as a result of, say, the firm innovating or doing something new. You need to identify and evidence those sensing, seizing and transforming routines. Remember also that dynamic capabilities act on the resources and competency portfolio of the firm. So they're not part of any one competencies. These are routines and processes that act on that portfolio of competencies. Also be careful not to mix up competencies and dynamic capabilities. For example, R&D is better seen as a dynamic capability rather than a competency. An R&D competency will very rarely pass the VRIRO test. But that's okay. Remember that when you're doing a full strategic analysis, we'll be doing both an RBV analysis and a dynamic capabilities analysis, and so you'll pick up the relevant issues in one of those approaches. So just to finally conclude on dynamic capabilities, remember, dynamic capabilities are specific repeating routines that manage and renew the firm's resources and competencies. They provide sustainable competitive advantage through the organisation continually developing new resource advantages, a series of temporary competitive advantages generated by routines that create and renew the firm's resources and competencies. As we have seen, it helps us to identify those routines by thinking of them as being of three types: learning or sensing, managing or seizing, and transforming routines. And successful firms put in place routines that cover each of those areas. And when we're doing an analysis using dynamic capabilities, we do need to look for specific deliberate routines to show the presence of dynamic capabilities. Thank you for watching.